I still remember the exact moment he handed me that letter. We were sitting on overturned ammo crates behind an old mud brick compound somewhere in the outskirts of Al-Hadar. Sunset was crawling over the horizon, melting the sky into that mix of red and burnt gold that always made the desert feel both beautiful and dangerous at the same time. My buddy, Corporal Daniel "Danny" Watts, was cleaning his rifle, humming that same country tune he always sang when he was nervous. I'd known him long enough to notice the small things. His hands shook more than usual. His eyes kept drifting toward the hills, as if expecting something to come crawling out of the darkness. He finished reassembling the rifle, then reached into the inner pocket of his vest. When he pulled out a small, sealed white envelope, I didn't think much of it. Soldiers sometimes wrote letters before big missions. It wasn't a tradition, more like an unspoken ritual. But the look on his face wasn't the look of a man being sentimental. It was the look of a man settling something unfinished. He held the envelope out and said, "Mark, if I don't make it back, give this to my folks." His voice cracked just enough for me to hear the fear behind it, the kind he never let anyone else see. I laughed at first, lightly, trying to ease the tension. "You're giving me a letter? Come on, Danny. We've been through worse than this." But he didn't smile. He didn't look away. He just kept holding out that envelope with a seriousness that froze me inside. He said, "This mission, I don't know, man. I've been feeling like something's wrong. Just promise me you'll deliver it." I took it from his hand. The envelope was soft, creased on the edges, clearly written earlier. His handwriting on the front read simply, "For Mom and Dad." I tucked it into my chest pocket and nodded. "You'll be there to give it to them yourself." But yeah, I promise. We didn't talk about it again. We didn't need to. 10 minutes later, we were loading into the convoy, engines rumbling, dust blowing into the evening air. The mission was supposed to be simple. A sweep of an abandoned village reported to have insurgent movement. But the desert doesn't care about plans. It doesn't care about promises. It doesn't care about letters. Halfway through the village, the world erupted. The first explosion tore through our point vehicle. Shrapnel rained down like metal hail. Then came the gunfire, sharp, coordinated, too precise for anything but an intentional trap. We scattered for cover, diving behind broken walls, old wells, collapsed roofs. Danny took position beside me behind a half-destroyed doorway. He fired back with controlled bursts, shouting updates, moving with the same confidence that made him one of the best riflemen I'd ever served with. But fate doesn't measure skill. Fate shows up whenever it wants, without warning, without mercy. I heard the whistle of an incoming round, and then he dropped beside me. No scream, no warning, just a sudden collapse. I grabbed him by the vest and pulled him into deeper cover. Blood spread under him faster than I could stop it. His eyes were half open, fixed on nothing and everything at the same time. I pressed my hand against the wound, yelling for the medic, yelling for him to stay with me, yelling anything that might keep him tethered to this world. But his breaths faded, then slowed, then stopped. And right there, under smoke and gunfire, I felt the envelope against my chest. It suddenly weighed more than my rifle. When we finally made it out of that hellhole, Danny's body was flown home for the funeral. I stood with the family in their small church in rural Tennessee, dressed in my formal uniform, hands folded, face stiff from holding back everything inside. His mother hugged me so tightly it almost hurt. His father kept thanking me for my service, for being there with Danny in his final moments. They asked 1,000 questions. Was he scared? Did he say anything? Did he suffer? And the whole time, the letter sat in my breast pocket. After the ceremony, when the crowd thinned out and people started gathering for food and condolences, I stepped outside to get some air. I pulled the envelope out and looked at it in the late afternoon light. It felt heavier every time I touched it. I knew it was time. I walked back toward his parents, rehearsing the words in my head. "Danny wanted you to have this." I must have said it 100 times silently. But when I approached them, when I saw the pain still wet in his mother's eyes, I froze. My hand wouldn't move. Something inside me said, "Not yet." His father noticed me standing there and put a hand on my shoulder. "He was lucky to have a friend like you, Sergeant." And just like that, I lost the nerve. I tucked the letter back into my pocket and lied. "Just checking on you both. If you ever need anything, I'm here." I walked away from them with that envelope still sealed, still unspoken. Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned to months. The letter stayed in my locker, then in my footlocker when I returned overseas for another rotation. Every time I opened it, The sight of that small folded envelope hit me like a punch to the chest. But I couldn't give it to them, because I knew deep down that whatever Danny had written wasn't something they needed to hear. It wasn't closure. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't words from a hopeful son. Danny was the kind of man who hid his darkest thoughts behind jokes and loud laughter. He talked about his guilt over things that happened in missions long before I met him. He carried weight no one else could see. And that look he had when he gave me the letter, it wasn't the look of a man writing a goodbye filled with love. It was the look of a man confessing something he didn't want anyone to forgive. And I was right. Months later, after I tried for the 100th time to convince myself to deliver it, I finally sat on my bunk one night and opened it. Not out of curiosity, not out of disobedience, but because I needed to know if giving it to them would destroy them. Inside was a simple folded sheet of paper with shaky handwriting. The first line crushed me. Mom, Dad, I'm tired. The rest was even harder to read. He talked about the nightmares, the guilt, the feeling of being empty no matter how hard he fought to stay strong. He wrote about mistakes he made, people he couldn't save, choices he wished he could undo. He blamed himself for everything, even things that weren't his fault. He apologized over and over for being a burden. He ended with, "Please don't be angry. I just needed someone to know." There was no love, no warmth, no hope. It was a goodbye from a man who believed he had already died long before that mission. If I had handed that letter to his parents, it would have shattered them. It would have rewritten their memory of their son into something painful and irreversible. So I didn't deliver it. I folded it back, sealed it again, and kept it. Not because I wanted to carry his secrets, but because his parents deserved peace more than the truth. Years rolled by, and the world moved on. I stayed in the military, served more deployments, trained new recruits, watched kids grow into men and men crumble into ghosts. But no matter what else I lived through, that envelope never left me. I kept it tucked inside my uniform chest pocket on every deployment thereafter. Some soldiers carried pictures of their families. Some carried Lucky Charms. I carried Danny's letter, not as a burden, but as a reminder of the weight we all carry. A reminder of how close the edge can be for even the strongest among us. Sometimes at night, when I sat alone cleaning my weapon or staring into the dark, I'd feel the envelope through the fabric and think about him. Think about how someone so full of life could write something so filled with pain. And it reminded me that war doesn't just kill the body. Sometimes it kills pieces of you long before the bullet ever arrives. We had a reunion one year, a gathering of the few guys from our old squad who were still around and still breathing. They asked about Danny. They always did. Guys who never met him heard stories about him because I talked about him so often. They'd laugh at the stories, ask what he was like, ask how he died. But no one ever asked if he left a letter. No one ever asked if he confessed anything. No one ever asked if his last words were written instead of spoken. Maybe they sensed it was something private. Or maybe they sensed the weight I carried and didn't want to add to it. One night, years after I retired from service, I found myself sitting alone in my small living room. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your breathing sound too loud. I opened an old wooden box where I kept my medals, dog tags, and the few photos that survived my deployments. And there it was, the envelope. As clean as the day I sealed it back, as heavy as the day he handed it to me. I held it for a long time, turning it over in my hands, reading the words for Mom and Dad over and over again. My chest tightened the same way it had when I first saw them. I thought about driving to Tennessee, finding his parents, and finally handing it over. But after all those years, what good would it do? Would it answer anything? Would it ease their pain, or reopen it? Truth is, some truths aren't meant to be delivered. Some goodbyes aren't meant to be read. Some wounds aren't meant to be reopened. I sat there for nearly an hour before I finally stood, walked outside, and placed the envelope into the small metal fire pit I used for burning old paperwork. I held a lighter to the edge and watched as the flame began to curl the paper, turning white into brown, then black. The fire didn't roar. It didn't flare. It just burned steady and quiet, almost respectful. In that moment I whispered, "Rest now, brother. I carried it for you." And as the ashes lifted into the night air, I felt a weight leave my chest, slowly, gently, permanently. I didn't deliver the letter, but I honored it. I protected his parents. I protected the memory of the man he wanted to be, not the one the war turned him into. And maybe, just maybe, That was the real promise I kept.